Daniel Camargo Barbosa, a psychopath initially from Colombia in South America, was known as a serial killer. It is believed that between 1970 and 1980, he sexually assaulted and murdered over 150 young girls in the countries of Colombia and Ecuador. Daniel Camargo Barbosa, also known as the Mangrove Monster and the Sadist of El Charquito, was a Colombian and Ecuadorian pedophilic and ephebophilic robber, serial rapist, serial killer, and stalker. Camargo's mother died when he was 2 years old, and his father soon remarried another woman. Camargo was a bright student who excelled in school. Camargo eventually lost interest in interacting with his father, and he honed his newly acquired ability to lie and manipulate others to avoid speaking with him. However, regardless of the topic, whenever he attempted to contact Briceño, he would cut him off and tell Camargo that he was useless and hopeless. His stepmother, Dioselina Fernandez, mainly influenced Camargo's childhood. Briceño was emotionally distant and much more interested in his business than his family. Fernandez was an adolescent at the time of her marriage. She was obsessed with the idea of having her own daughter, which only grew stronger when she discovered she could not bear children. She adored her stepdaughter while abusing her stepson, whom she punished by forcing him to undress from the waist down and hitting him in the bare buttocks with a bullwhip. Fernandez took Camargo's pants, made him wear women's clothes, and invited his classmates to watch him for becoming violent and fighting at school. This abuse ruined his popularity at school and made him a frequent target of bullying. Camargo came to despise women and all things feminine after that. In the early 1940s, Briceño sent him to a Bogotá Catholic boarding school. Camargo excelled academically again, but his family's financial hardship during La Violencia ended his education. Camargo had to drop out and sell door-to-door to support them. He found it easy to persuade Capital residents to let him in or buy. After a few dates, he convinced Alcira Castillo, a young client, to rent a house with him in 1957. He underestimated the costs. He robbed a client's shop on May 24, 1958, to make ends meet. He was arrested for petty theft hours later. Camargo took a clipboard from a desk and pretended to be busy as he left with the officers at shift end. He returned home and carried on. In 1962, Camargo fell in love with Esperanza, leaving Castillo despite their 2 children. He found Esperanza in bed with another man after learning she wasn't a virgin. Camargo targeted females willing to pursue girls as young as 9 if they were attractive. His favorite targets were peasants, maids, and students transitioning from primary school to college. He'd approach them, claiming to be a foreigner looking for a Protestant pastor in a church on the outskirts of town to whom he needed to deliver a large sum of money. Camargo's educated vocabulary and fluency in English and Portuguese aided his deception. He would then offer the girls a reward, such as a small portion of the money, candy, or pens, in exchange for showing him the way to the church. The older victims were offered jobs at the church. The majority of the actual murders took place in remote and forested areas that required a previous bus trip. Camargo would walk a short distance away from the victim and hide among the vegetation, claiming that he was now familiar with the area and remembered a shortcut to their destination. If the victim became suspicious and refused to follow him, Camargo would simply change location to find a new victim. If his enticement worked, Camargo would threaten the victims with a knife and rape them in a remote location before strangling, stabbing, hacking, slashing, or crushing them with a machete. When an adult woman hit him with a rock while raping her, he became so enraged that he decapitated her and threw the head away. Another victim's lungs, kidneys, and heart were extracted. Camargo would kill his victims and steal their clothes and valuables before leaving their bodies to be eaten by scavengers. He always carried a second shirt with him to change his bloody clothes. Whenever his hands became bloodied, he would urinate to wash the blood away. He memorized any information about the victims, even minor details like scars, tattoos, and moles. He even obtained their phone numbers and called them after committing a crime to taunt them. Camargo initially wanted to end the engagement but was unable to do so. He persuaded her that she had disappointed him and that she should make amends by giving him virgin girls to take her virginity. Esperanza agreed and lured 5 young girls to their apartment, where she drugged them with barbiturates so Camargo could rape them while they were unconscious. This lasted until 1964 when their 5th victim realized what had happened and reported them to the authorities. Camargo was initially sentenced to 3 years in prison after the couple was arrested. Another judge, however, increased this to 8 years. Camargo saw himself as a victim and resolved that the next time he raped a girl, he would also murder her. He was released and moved to Brazil after serving his complete sentence. Still, he was arrested for illegal immigration in 1973 and deported to Colombia. Camargo began working as a street vendor in Colombia, selling television monitors. Camargo was walking in front of a school in Barranquilla on May 2, 1974, when he noticed a 9-year-old girl he found attractive. He lured her to a remote location, raped her, and strangled her, then dumped her body alongside the TV sets he was transporting. Camargo returned the next day to dispose of the body and retrieve the sets. Still, a police officer who suspected him and arrested him followed him. He was found guilty and sentenced to 30 years in prison on the island of Gorgona, 35 kilometers off Colombia's Pacific coast. Camargo came across a rowboat on a beach 10 years into his sentence. He jumped in immediately and didn't stop paddling until he reached the mainland hours later. The prison reported him as a fugitive, but the authorities assumed he drowned at sea because the currents were too dangerous to navigate without experience. The media even ran stories about Camargo being eaten by sharks. Camargo had spent the previous years studying sea currents, reading navigation books, and learning to orient himself precisely. He ran south towards the Ecuadorian border as soon as he landed. Camargo was the first prisoner to ever escape from what was dubbed the Colombian Alcatraz. Camargo first traveled to the Andean capital of Quito. Still, on the cold night of December 6, 1984, on the open sea, he decided to return to the coast. Camargo kidnapped and murdered another 9-year-old girl in Quevedo, Ecuador, on December 18. Between 1984 and 1986, he committed at least 55 rapes and murders of young girls and adult women. The majority of the murders took place in Guayas province. Still, some occurred as far away as Quito, Macala, and Ambato. Camargo survived by working as a porter in Guayaquil's markets or selling clothing and objects taken from the victims during this time. Initially, the authorities believed the murders were the work of organized crime. Many rumors pointed to white slavery rings, satanic cults, or influential people protected by the rules, as in Lopez's case. The most accurate rumor was that a new serial killer, dubbed the Beast of the Andes, had decided to break Lopez's previous victim count record. Camargo was apprehended on February 26, 1986, by 2 Quito police officers after being discovered with bloody clothes stolen from his last victim, Elizabeth Telps. In addition to the clothes, the suitcase he was transporting contained a copy of Fyodor Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment, which he had obtained while in prison in Gorgona. Camargo was apprehended and transferred to Guayaquil after a local woman named Mara Alexandra Velez stated that she had survived an attack by a man matching his description. Camargo admitted to killing 71 people in Ecuador after escaping from prison. He was convicted and sentenced to 16 years in prison for murder in 1989, the maximum sentence available in Ecuador. He was imprisoned at Quito's Garcia Moreno prison, where Lopez is being held. Camargo was sitting in his cell on November 13, 1994, when a new inmate, 29-year-old Giovanni Arcesio Noguera Jaramillo, entered and forced him to his knees. After declaring, "It is the hour of vengeance," Noguera shanked Camargo 8 times, killing him and severing one of his ears as a trophy. Noguera showed the guards the ear, claiming that his aunt was one of Camargo's victims and that he had avenged her. Camargo's body was buried in a mass grave in Quito's El Baton Cemetery because no one claimed it. When he died, he was 64 years old. Thanks for watching.